A Gap in the Spectrum is Marilyn Duckworth's first novel, written in 1959 when she was 23 years old. It is a novel whose strange and quiet compulsiveness entitles it to a very long reading life. It was published by New Authors Limited, an imprint of Hutchinson's in London. It was republished in 1986 by Oxford University Press. The silent, brilliant whirlpool of imagination that this novel discovers makes it an outstanding addition to the New Authors list. A Gap in the Spectrum by Marilyn Duckworth, read by Sarah D.
Chapter 13. We returned to London 2 days later. I had originally intended to stay at the Feathers until I found myself a job. My father had provided me with enough money to last the 2 or 3 weeks until this time. Now, however, I found I had spent nearly half this money in Paris and on my new frock. It was more urgent than ever that I should waste no time in finding a job. Stephen said he knew of a place in Reigate where we could almost certainly get rooms. Meanwhile, I checked in at the Feathers, and Stephen returned to his school at Salford's half a day late. "What about nursing?" Stephen had suggested when I told him I couldn't type. "Oh, no, it's not very good pay. Psychiatric, though, they pay better." "That's an idea. It would be interesting, wouldn't it? I don't want anything dull." "Oh, it would be that all right, but hard work." So I wrote to the matron at Selwyn Hospital and made an appointment for an interview. It was agreed that I start work on the following Monday. I met Stephen for dinner to tell him about it. "Now shut up a minute and let me tell you my news." He speared a piece of curried rabbit. "Yes?" I looked up at him. "We move into our new home tomorrow," he grinned. "What's it like?" "Only one room, I'm afraid, but absolutely huge. And there's a little alcove with stove and sink, etc. We'll have to share a bathroom. Does that matter?" "Not really. How much, anyway?" "2.10, and pennies in the gas." "Have you told Maureen?" "Yes," he laughed at me. "What did she say?" "She wasn't very surprised." "But what did she say?" "Look, stop worrying about what people think." He paused. "She's lending us some bedclothes and crockery, and I think she said an iron. The furniture's pretty dreadful, but there's a lovely big bed." The following day I spent filling the cupboards and drawers from our suitcases and rearranging the furniture. Stephen arrived early in the evening, and we opened a tin of mulligatawny soup. "The woman upstairs came and introduced herself," I told him, picking up the hot soup dish. "Oh, Lord, no." Stephen raised his head. "I hope you didn't forget that you were Mrs. Bartlett." "No, I didn't. It sounded so funny, though. I didn't ask her in because of the mess, but she kept peering round the door." "Perhaps you should have done. But no, we don't want to get too friendly with people. They get too inquisitive." "Isn't it a bit sordid?" "Only if you think it is. I think it's fun. Don't be silly. Of course it's not sordid," he added, as I still looked doubtful. "Well, then, I wish it wasn't so complicated, having my mail sent to the hospital instead of here. What will Mummy think?" "She'll think you live in, like most of the nurses do." "And supposing she asks?" "You can skirt around it. Anyway, one little lie. I've decided you've too much of a conscience. You'd be a lot happier without." He pushed his plate back. "But, Stephen—" "Yes?" "You've got a conscience with me, haven't you? I mean, you wouldn't tell me a lie or anything." "Darling," he pulled me onto his knee. "Mind my spoon." "Darling," he went on, "I love you. I'd never lie to you. We've got to trust each other completely, haven't we?" "Yes." "Well, what's the matter?" "I feel silly with the light on." "Oh, all right." He bounced his knees and let me slide to the floor. "What did you mean, anyway?" after a pause. "The light was on in Paris. Did you feel silly then?" "Sort of. What's the matter?" He was looking at me frowning and didn't shift his gaze for some seconds. Then he said, "I'll turn it off then. We'll do the dishes later." He moved towards me in the dark. "Honeymoons are always hell. You'll get over it." "Are they? Have you done this before?" "Supposing I said yes?" His voice sounded almost pleased by my question, and his teeth flashed white in the dark. But you can't have done, can you? I did try it once before. That time it was sordid. We lived in London. Actually, it was her flat. But don't worry, I didn't love her. It was just a mistake. I've never loved anyone till you. Well, go on, say something. What about? Don't you want to know anything about her? Not particularly. I remember how taut I was holding my body. There was a silence. Then Stephen went on talking, rather defiantly. She was a bitch anyway, and she had pimples on her back. She had a funny way of walking, though, rather cute. She wasn't fat, but her arms and legs were rather plump. I remember once I said she had round wrists, and she almost threw a fit. I told her eyes were round too. She didn't like the word round at all. He kept pausing between sentences to see if I would say anything. You don't think I talk too much? It doesn't matter. She was very difficult to seduce. I didn't think she was scared, just hard-hearted. One day we were reading Van der Velde, lying on her bed together, and suddenly it was quite easy. I don't know what happened. She seemed quite pleased with herself afterwards, never stopped talking about it. In fact, she got rather low-minded. She had a very peculiar private vocab. You don't mind me talking about this? It doesn't matter. You said that before. Oh, sorry. You see, I want to tell you everything now. We shouldn't have any secrets. I want you to tell me everything too. You're not annoyed about anything, are you? No, it isn't that. I'm just not very interested. Well, you must be queer then. He sounded suddenly childish. Yes, I think I am. I told you wouldn't like me as you discovered things about me. I never said I didn't like you. I love you. I want to know everything about you. What sort of things? Well, if you ever did anything awful that you've stored up without telling anyone. What a morbid mind you've got. What makes you think I've done something like that? Nothing. Only I've done plenty, and I hoped you had too. Well, I can't think of anything offhand. Can you wait a while? In that case, how many men have there been in your life? Oh, Stephen, you are nosy. I explained. All right. Now let's see. There was Barry, and Robert, of course. Of course. Who was Barry? Just a boy. Was he in love with you? I don't know. I said it impatiently. Well, what did you do with him? Where did you go? Oh, pictures and things. Dances? I suppose so. What did he look like? Is that important? Well, did you ever want to go to bed with him? No, I didn't. And that's all I'm saying about Barry. You can read his next letter when I get it. Letter? Does he write to you? He sounded horrified. Now and then. A lot of rubbish. Well, you're not writing to him. Have you got any letters from him that I could read now? Sit down. I threw them out when I unpacked. You sure? Of course I'm sure. I don't tell lies. Neither do I. Diana, please don't quarrel. Come and kiss me. He lay back on the bed and drew me down to him. Now tell me about the others, he said a few minutes later. The other what? Men in your life. He said it almost timidly. Oh, for heaven's sake. He started as I jerked away. All right, don't jump out of your skin. I only wanted to know. There must have been others. Oh, I expect so. You expect? Don't you know? Of course, but there's nobody important enough to remember. I don't keep asking you about your girlfriends, I added. No, I wish you would. He paused. Did Kathleen tell you anything about my girlfriends? Not much. Oh, what did she say? I told you. Nothing much. I don't remember. Something about a girl upsetting your varsity exams. Oh, that's Linda. What did she say about her? Nothing at all. I shut my mouth tight. She was a funny girl, as tall as me and terribly, terribly pale. She was short-sighted too, but she wouldn't wear glasses. It wouldn't have mattered. He waited a moment, then went on. She was awfully neurotic. I used to think I was madly in love with her. He was silent for so long this time that I said, Weren't you? No, she was a nymphomaniac. You mean to say you didn't like it? Sometimes, but she scared me. She was quite crazy at times. The things she said. She had a funny smell, too. How do you mean? I mean, she had a funny smell. She wouldn't use perfume. Oh, she was clean. She just had a smell. I couldn't help laughing. I hope I haven't. Why, I didn't mind it. Rather attractive. The next day was Saturday, and Stephen lay in bed till nearly midday. I left him there reading the paper and took some washing to the laundrette just around the corner. Watching the clothes turn over and over in the suds, I tried to marshal my thoughts. Two things were uppermost in my mind. One of them, my coming job in the mental hospital. The other, Stephen. At the same time as feeling unusually happy and reassured by his company, I was wondering how long I would continue to keep it. I was afraid I might start needing him in the way he seemed to need me. Even now, the thought of his tiring of me made me feel limp and miserable. I watched my neighbour spread her clothes in the dryer and followed her movements mechanically. Already I was finding it a strain keeping up the pretense that I was the same Diana Clouston who had lived in this world for 19 years. Now I had to add to this the pretense that I was Mrs. Bartlett. I felt as if my mind was full of bulging cupboards whose doors kept threatening to burst open. All the same, Stephen loved me. It was a nice feeling. Outside, a fat, blind woman walked slowly along the gutter, singing Santa Lucia in a thin, high voice, and holding a shabby black handbag in front of her stomach. I was watching her through the glass windows when a voice said at my elbow, "Hello, I'm up." "Yes, I can see that." It was Stephen, unshaven and smiling. "Let's buy something mad for lunch. The woman upstairs is having kippers. Nearly stunk the place out. I'm starving." The next evening he snatched the paper out of my hands as I sat reading it and said explosively, "You're driving me mad." "What's the matter?" "I'm going crazy." I laughed at him. "Well, I can't help it." "Yes, you can. Stop reading and talk to me." "All right." "No, not like that. Look as if you want to. Don't you want to?" "Yes, of course, Stephen. I'm just mystified." "Oh, don't keep calling me Stephen." He lit a cigarette viciously. "Well, that's your name, isn't it? Would you prefer Steve?" "No, I wouldn't. Can't you think of anything else?" "What like?" "Like, what do I call you?" "Oh," he wanted me to call him darling. I suppressed a laugh. He looked at me suspiciously. "You never will you?" "It's a bit difficult. Don't rush me." "What's difficult about it? What did you call Robert?" I'd known Robert longer. "I suppose you think I'm silly." "No, of course I don't," I told him. "It's just, I feel this affair's lopsided." "I'm sorry. I suppose it is. I don't mean to be like this. I just am. And I'm trying not to be." I said this with sudden sincerity. "Perhaps if you didn't try too hard." Let's talk about it then." I went to the table and picked up the nylon nightdress which lay there folded. I stroked it. "Do you like it?" Stephen looked pleased. "Like it? I chose it, didn't I? It's lovely, even if I freeze." "I'll make sure you're warm. Darling Di, I love you when you smile. I love you all the time. I love you. Please come to bed." Chapter 14. I presented myself at the hospital on the following Monday. It was a loosely rambling red brick building placed high in the Surrey hills. To reach it, one had either to take the private coach which followed a narrow zigzag road through a tunnel of trees, or walk up a series of shallow steps across the fields. The coach had already left at the time I arrived at the foot of the hill, so I began the monotonous climb. The moment I entered the big main doors and passed the enquiry desk, the hospital atmosphere struck me, the smell of disinfectant and the hurrying of nurses' footsteps in a distant corridor. The walls were hung with huge prints of modern paintings, and, oddly, their bright luridness served more than anything to remind me that I was in a mental hospital. The matron was coming out of her office as I approached, followed by a large collie dog. She greeted me absently and took me to be fitted out with a uniform. The sewing room was warm and whirring with little black machines. A fat woman in a white overall led me into a back room and turned me round thoughtfully. "You'll have to get some black stockings, love. Here, let me show you how to fix your cap," Have you got any pins? She raised her warm-smelling arms to my head. Now, a coat. We're a bit short on coats. She rattled through the hangers. This here's about the nearest we've got. It'll do, won't it? I looked at myself in the mirror. The thick black ARP coat hung heavily on my shoulders and stopped short several inches above the striped uniform. Keep you warm anyway. When are you on? Now, I think. Well, you better leave the rest of these to be named. Have you got a laundry bag? I'll have one for you when you come back. You'd better hop along to assistant now. Do you know how to get there? I went where she directed, and soon I was following a sister and a newly engaged orderly along the bare corridor. The orderly was small and timid, and I wondered if I looked as apprehensive as she did. To reach Ward 1, we had to pass through the adjoining sitting room. The patients were distributed tidily around the room in a variety of armchairs, knitting or writing letters peacefully. They looked surprisingly ordinary. Their blank faces glanced briefly at us as we passed, then returned to what they had been engaged in. I noticed how pale their ankles looked above their slippers. In the ward, only 4 patients were propped on their pillows, and 2 nurses were busy making the other beds. This is Nurse Clouston, Sister introduced me. Will you take care of her? The phone was ringing, and she darted back out of the ward. I'm Nurse O'Rourke. Have you done any nursing before? One of the nurses asked me as I went round the other side of the bed to help her. My hands were trembling with eagerness as I tried to follow her quick movements. No, I haven't, I'm afraid. You'll be in the school then? No, I'm waiting till the new term starts. Oh, you'll like it in the school, though. We have a lot of fun, don't we, O'Brien? Here, let me show you how to do the corners. She flicked the bedspread into place. That's all of those, thank heaven. Would you help me get Mrs. Dean up now? She's just had an operation, a tumour. As we approached, an old faded face smiled up at us from under a crocheted cap. How are you today, Mrs. Dean? Nurse O'Rourke shouted, then took a hearing aid from the locker and plugged it into the old woman's ear. Can you hear now? Yes, thank you, she nodded eagerly. Wait while I get her chair. Nurse O'Rourke moved off quickly to return with a heavy wheelchair and a red blanket. While she had been gone, Mrs. Dean had begun to slip slowly sideways on her pillow, still smiling foolishly. I had watched her, oddly fascinated, without making a move. Now I helped the nurse hoist her fat body off the bed. She can stand for a bit, the nurse said, and added, raising her voice, You're standing well today, dear. Yes, I am, she smiled. But when we lowered her towards the chair, she seemed to collapse into it and melt against the arms. Then her smile faded with childish suddenness. Her nightcap had fallen off and disclosed a shaven patch on her head. She glanced at us suspiciously as she clawed the cap out of her lap and fumbled it back onto her head. Then, miraculously, the smile returned. I wheeled her out into the sitting room and was on my way back to the ward when Nurse O'Rourke called me into Sister's office. This is the suicide list, she told me in a conspiratorial whisper. Mrs. Farrow has just gone on it. She was saving up her sleeping tablets under her pillow. And Mrs. Charles, she's the one in the red dressing gown that smokes so much. She used to be assistant matron, thinks she's getting her old job back, but of course she isn't. She ran quickly through the list. And that's why we must never leave the ward unattended. O'Brien's on now, but there must always be one of us. I've got a lecture at 10 o'clock, so I'll have to go soon. Have you had tea yet? You didn't come on till 9, did you? We usually have one about 15:15. You'd better have one now. Come and I'll show you. She led the way out, glancing at her watch as she went. It was dark in the kitchen, and 2 women were busy at the deep sink. Can we have this kettle, Maria? Yes, love. You're a bit late today, aren't you? There's wafers in the tin. Nurse O'Rourke pushed open the door of a little pantry, and we seated ourselves among the shelves lined with biscuit tins and hung with blue cups. There should be some doughnuts around somewhere. I wonder who this belongs to. She picked up a rock cake, sniffed it, then took a bite. What's in the tins? Empty. Ah, iced wafer? No, thanks. I think I'll just have this. I sipped at my tea. She shrugged. Wait till you've been here a while. You get that hungry on duty all morning. I'm on a long day today, so I'll get lunch about 12:15, but you'll have to wait till 1:45. When's your long day?" "How do you mean?" I looked blank. "Didn't they tell you? One day you work from 7:15 in the morning till 9 at night." "Oh, yes, then you get the next day off?" I nodded. "That's right. O'Brien and I can never get used to working on Sundays. Nobody works on a Sunday at home." She rummaged in the tins again. "I don't suppose you've tried the canteen yet?" "No. Anyway, I'll probably go home." "Oh, you're living out then?" "Yes, at Reigate. I'm flatting with a friend." I thought cosily of Stephen. "Oh, I don't think I'd like that. We have a lot of fun here, dancing and pictures, you know, and the canteen isn't bad. Thursdays it's awful, and Fridays they don't know how to cook fish. We have a lot of Irish nurses here, so we're mostly Catholics. And Jamaicans. What are you? Religion, I mean." "Oh, I was going to turn a Catholic once, but I changed my mind." "Well, I think it's a lot of fuss anyhow. We all get to heaven in the end. That's what I think, anyway." "I thought Catholics believed no one but themselves went to heaven," I asked. "Oh, I don't know all that." She dismissed the subject with a last bite of her biscuit. "Goodness, I must get to this lecture. I was late yesterday, too. No, you stay and finish. I'll tell O'Brien you're here. Rinse your cup out as you go." I returned almost immediately to the ward. Nurse O'Brien was studying a magazine at the bedside of one of the patients. She was taller than O'Rourke and serious-faced. She signed to me, and I went over. "Are you any good at crosswords?" "Reasonably," I told her. "Well, would you help Mrs. Farrow with this? There are some new patients coming in, and I've got to see to their cases." At 1:00 I was joined by a little Jamaican nurse with round brown cheeks. "I'm Nurse Pollock," she told me briefly. "You can go on to the lecture now." "But I'm not doing lectures yet." I looked bewildered. "Oh, this is different. Every week Dr. Bryant deals with one of the patient's case histories and we discuss it. It's quite interesting, really." She looked defiant and then added, "In Doctor's room, next to Sister's." I went obediently in the direction she pointed. O'Rourke, O'Brien, the sister, and a large, forbidding staff nurse were already there when I arrived. I joined them in the seats along the wall, surreptitiously rolling down my sleeves, as I saw they had done. Dr. Bryant came in frowning, with one arm across his back and carrying a sheaf of papers. "Well," he crossed his legs and looked up with a smile. "Who did you want to discuss today, staff?" "Mrs. Baird, please." "Ah, yes, Mrs. Baird. Very interesting case, that. What do you know about Mrs. Baird?" "She's an alcoholic," Nurse O'Rourke volunteered. "Yes, she drinks gin and tonic, a nice clean drink, according to her. It might surprise you to know she was once a very gay person, very hail fellow well met. But have you ever noticed how calmly she can talk about gruesome subjects? For instance, her brother's death. He died quite recently in a car crash, and remain quite impassive. It's almost as if part of her were dead. I suppose it is, in a way. It was during one of her drinking bouts that she fell and damaged her brain. I'm afraid we can never bring it to life again, completely. Tell me, do you think Mrs. Baird will ever be discharged from here?" He was looking at me. "No," I stuttered. "Yes," he contradicted me. "She'll be discharged, but before long she'll be back. All we can do is keep her health in reasonably good condition, but she'll go on deteriorating. I'm afraid she'll never be really well." I thought of Mrs. Baird's sagging face, with pouches under the eyes, and remembered how her discoloured jowls had wobbled as I hoisted her yellow limbs onto the bedpan. Supposing I was ever to become like that, where would I get any sympathy? I would merely repel people. I shuddered, then laughed at myself. After all, it was unlikely that I could turn into something like that overnight. But was there any disease which produced those effects more rapidly? I grew serious again. There was so much I didn't know about this world. But now the doctor was getting up to go. "I'm afraid I'll have to leave early today," he said. "Could I see you for a moment, sister?" "We're off now," O'Brien said in my ear. "Are you coming to the canteen? You should see the way they cook things. The oven's absolutely huge." "No, I think I'll go home. I want to do some shopping." "You'll have to walk down. There isn't a coach until the 9 o'clock one. But come along and see the holiday lists with me before you go. I think they've changed my long day. I found my way with difficulty through the maze of corridors, back to the sewing room to pick up my uniform. Running down the steps with the brown paper parcel bouncing against my knees, I felt strangely exhilarated. I could hardly wait to get home and tell Stephen about the morning. Thinking of what his expression would be when he saw me in my uniform with the short, thick coat, I almost laughed out loud. Of course, he wouldn't be home for a couple of hours yet. Remembering this, I slowed down, but caught sight of the bus at the end of the little lane, so I sprinted across the bridge to jump onto the platform. Extending my fare, I gulped to recover my breath, and the cold air tasted like a drink of water. How hungry I was! But as soon as the door of our room closed behind me, I began to remember the awful parts. Mrs. Dean's fixed smile as she slipped sideways on the pillow, Mrs. Baird, the alcoholic. I shook off my coat quickly and began to prepare myself some lunch. I had turned on the radio, but it always took some time to warm up. It suddenly blared and I started, breaking the egg I was sliding into the frying pan. Dripping egg white, I ran across the room to turn down the volume. I was peeling potatoes for dinner when Stephen appeared in the doorway. "Well," he looked me up and down, then came over and kissed me. They put enough starch in these things, don't they?" "You're telling me. This uniform's standing out about an inch from my body. Wait till you see me in my cap, though." "It sounds as if it's been fun." "Oh, yes." I sobered suddenly. "Well, go on. Tell me about it. I know I've got a morbid mind, but what were the patients like?" "They seemed quite ordinary, really." "Disappointing?" he grinned. "I'm on the curable ward. They put you there first." He nodded. "Do you give them that shock treatment, or what?" "Yes, and insulin, but no one had any today. It was quite dull, really." I suddenly found I couldn't talk about it. "Do you like corned beef? I've made a casserole."